Hi, and welcome to Insight Community of the Desert. My name is Ian Challis, and I'm re-recording our my in-person talk from this morning at my Zell Center because we lost our Zoom connection, and so our Zoom folks did not get to hear the whole talk, and also the recording was, of course, incomplete. So this is a talk from January 19th. And I just want to take a moment to welcome you just as you are right here, right now. And thank you for coming and taking part in practice in this way. And wanting to ask, to reflect, how are you? How is your heart? And are you finding chances to relax and settle with life as it is? Because before the meditation, I was noting how much we're holding right now. The fire and the destruction just over the mountains, all the loss and pain and uncertainty of that, the incredible upheaval and suffering of losing your home, your livelihood, the things that you hold most dear. And these, of course, are losses that will be felt the most keenly by folks who are least able to bear them, withstand them, losing home, losing the ability to care for ourselves. In the metta practices, one of the wishes of well-being we often make is, may you care for yourself with ease. And in one of the prayers, may you feel safe and at home anywhere on the planet, because that sense of home and safety is essential to our human well-being. And we know that at any moment, we too could, and maybe many of us have experienced that sort of loss. A few years ago, it happened to me. One morning things were normal every day. And then that evening, I'm trying to figure out what I can save from the fire. I'm watching our home disappear. And some of us may be feeling that loss of home in the larger senses too, climate change and destruction, the intensification of the natural processes that are putting everyone in the world in either direct or downstream indirect danger. And many of us no longer recognize the country that we're living in as the home we thought we knew. The greed and aversion and delusion that are so prevalent and seemingly on the rise everywhere we look, the splits and the separation. And we may be feeling a lot of fear and unease because of that. Makes total sense that our sense of home on so many levels is becoming upside down, surreal, frightening. And I just, want to name that anxiety and fear that many of us are feeling right now. A few nights ago, I had one of those dreams where you're protecting your home. Do you ever have those kind of dreams? For me, they're often centered around doors and windows. This last one, the front door, was way too small for its frame, and I was trying to close the door, but the latch wouldn't hold, and there were spaces everywhere around the door anyway. And I don't know who or what was trying to get in, but I was doing my very best to defend that sense of home, of safety, of refuge. And I've had a lot of those kind of dreams in the last few months. And I think it's not hard to see in them the anxiety I feel for this country, especially coming up to tomorrow and the year ahead. And for the most vulnerable among us, the anxiety I feel for the world. And yet, and yet, this being born into a human form has never been a guarantee of safety and well-being. This is what we call dukkha, the Buddha's first noble truth. And dukkha is often translated as suffering, and there are many ways to sort of feel into this word. and what the Buddha was expressing. And I think for me, a very helpful definition is existential pain, existential anxiety and pain, you know, the anxiety we feel that's inherent in being a human. So I wanted to read a little bit about dukkha from what the Buddha taught by Orhola Rahla. The First Noble Truth, dukkha, is generally translated by almost all scholars as the noble truth of suffering. And it's interpreted to mean that life, according to Buddhism, is nothing but suffering and pain. Both translation and interpretation are highly unsatisfactory and misleading. It's because of this limited, free, and easy translation and its superficial interpretation that many people have been misled into regarding Buddhism as pessimistic. Buddhism is neither pessimistic nor optimistic. If anything at all, it is realistic. It does not falsely lull you into living in a fool's paradise, nor does it frighten and agonize you with all kinds of imaginary fears and sins. He goes on to write, one physician may gravely exaggerate an illness and give up hope altogether. Another may ignorantly declare that there is no illness and that no treatment is necessary, thus deceiving the patient with a false consolation. You may call the first one pessimistic and the second optimistic. Both are equally dangerous. But a third physician diagnoses the symptoms correctly, understands the cause and the nature of the illness, sees clearly that it can be cured, and courageously administers a course of treatment, thus saving his patient. The Buddha is like the last physician. And he goes on to talk more about, different glosses of the word dukkha, uh, beyond suffering, ideas like imperfection, impermanence, emptiness, insubstantiality. And it's all pointing to that general anxiety and pain of being in a human body in an unstable world. And the typical coping mechanisms that we have for this condition, what the Buddha called the three poisons, are not the only response. And they are not the wise response, because greed, hatred, and delusion always add to the weight of dukkha that we experience personally and culturally. And they are the source of all the violence that we see in the world. So, as we often ask in meditation when we feel stuck or trapped, what else is here? What else can I remember, practice, call in? But before that, we need to take that first step, being like the Buddha as a physician and looking squarely at what is here, knowing it from a place of neither pessimism or unfounded optimism, but from looking deeply at what scares us. Suffering starts from ignorance, and it's very easy to continue in that vein. It's usually easier to look away from what's difficult. And we live in a culture of avoidance, distraction, and structures that deliberately seek to confuse, to exhaust, and to discourage us. And in this unique time of being immediately connected through news and social media and devices of all kinds, we are strangely growing more divided, more disconnected from each other. And this is because of a disconnection from wisdom, from truth and integrity. We turn for connection to places and platforms that don't truly care about that, don't truly want or support connection, because it isn't in their interest to foster that sort of peaceful, harmonious connection, because peace and connection with others increases well-being and satisfaction, and that is not what motivates us to search and to buy and to consume. Fear gets its power from our not looking at the dark places with understanding and making peace with them. knowing and understanding the intruder at the door, the monster in the basement, and what they're made of. So, what supports us? What holds us as we look deeply? Well, the more I have experienced of life, the more I know that for me, it is the three refuges, the triple gem of Buddhism, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha. The Buddha who represents and encourages our capacity to be free from delusion and awaken to our inherent goodness. The Dharma, the practices of mindfulness, clear seeing, caring, the Eightfold Path. And Sangha, so importantly, especially now, sharing the path with others, knowing that we are not alone, inspiring, heartening, supporting each other in our movements toward freedom. And these refuges are not spiritual bypass. They do not add to delusion because we can practice and verify them for ourselves. We can see what happens when I explore and remember my true nature. What happens when I prioritize meditation and the practice of the Eightfold Path? What happens when I associate with people who also hold these values? Do I become disconnected or do I become connected or more connected? Refuge is not a bypass. Refuge is the nourishment and the fuel that we need to meet these times. And in January of 2017, on a Sunday much like this, I was teaching and I quoted the African American Zen priest Zenju Earthlyn Manuel, where she says, "These are the times that we have been practicing for." And this is always true. We are always practicing for this moment, here and now. And I want to notice for a moment that this kind of looking at the monsters in the basement, at the fearsome ones rattling the door, is very real, immediate, and direct. Sometimes there is a sense when we go to a spiritual tradition and we speak about things like our radiant nature, nibbana, metta, boundless love, that we are bypassing or seeking comfort through transcendence. Kind of like, ugh, I can't deal with this. I can't get what I want in this world. I don't like it. So here's a special off ramp. Take this on to the next. This is all illusion anyway. And I've done some of that in my own life. But reality has a way of being real. It keeps showing up. And maybe there's a lofty concept that makes sense, and maybe I can hide out there for a bit. And one of those concepts might be emptiness, shunyata. And I want to take a little time with the teaching of emptiness because it is sometimes used as a bypass or an escape. But seeing clearly, it actually draws us back to what's here in real, empowering, and connecting ways. It can be a way of finding refuge and relating to the world in a healthy, responsive, wise way. So sometimes, like the concept of nibbana, emptiness is seen as a location or a realm or a place we get to. The emptiness from which all things emerge and interweave, the emptiness that all things return to, like an infinite storehouse of potentiality or the ground of being, the substrate, the source. What shunyata, emptiness, is pointing to, I believe, is the understanding that conditioned things do not stand alone. They are empty of an independent, persisting identity. Corelessness is a very good word. And there's a teaching where the Buddha uses the analogy of a banana tree, something that appears solid, but as you peel away the outer shell, you find there's no center. And in one of the suttas, the teaching stories, the Buddha said this: "Friends, Suppose a person needing heartwood, seeking heartwood, wandering in search of heartwood, so in other words, something very solid, would take a sharp axe and enter a forest. There he would see a banana tree, straight, young, without a fruit bud core. He would cut it down at the root, cut off the top, and unroll the leaf sheaths. As he unrolls the leaf sheaths, he would not find even softwood, much less heartwood. A wise one, examining the matter, would find it to be void, hollow, and insubstantial. So too, friends, whatever kinds of formations there are, they should be seen as they really are with correct wisdom thus. This is void, hollow, insubstantial, no thing. Sometimes shunyata is called nothingness. And the way to hear this from me, to understand it, is no thingness. There is no thing there. And in fact, this no thingness, emptiness, is characteristic of all conditioned things. Banana trees, personalities, rocks, homes, bodies, the earth itself, and internal things as well, our thoughts, emotions, feelings, this continual interplay of liking and not liking and needing and fearing, all of that's changing depending on emerging conditions. What is there to hold on to in any of it that is truly solid and fixed? And this teaching isn't meant to scare us. It's what the Buddha, as the good doctor, asks us to look at. What are we taking to be solid, independent, permanent, and is it so? Or are what we take to be things actually processes that are empty of independent, permanent thingness? So Thich Nhat Hanh writes quite a bit about emptiness and describes it very well. And I wanted to share a passage or two from the heart of the Buddha's teaching. The first door of liberation is emptiness, shunyata. We are empty of a separate, independent self. We cannot be by ourselves alone. We can only interbe with everything else in the cosmos. Wherever we go, we touch the nature of emptiness in everything we contact. We look deeply at the table, the blue sky, our friend, the mountain, the river, our anger and our happiness, and see that these are all empty of a separate self. When we touch these things deeply, we see the interbeing and interpenetrating nature of all that is. Emptiness does not mean non-existence. He writes further, when we first hear about emptiness, we feel a little frightened. After practicing for a while, we see that things do exist, only in a different way than we'd thought. Emptiness is the middle way between existent and non-existent. The beautiful flower does not become empty when it fades and dies. It is already empty in its essence. Looking deeply, we see that the flower is made of non-flower elements, light, space, clouds, earth, and consciousness. It is empty of a separate, independent self. He says, we have to learn to see ourselves in things that we thought were outside of ourselves in order to dissolve false boundaries. So this view of emptiness, which sounds lofty and transcendent, is actually deeply grounding, standing near and looking deeply into the doorway of impermanence and all the shadows around that. And it feels to me like this is the medicine that I need right now. It's easy to feel so entrenched, static, us and them, good and evil, right and wrong, to create others and enemies. Even when I cannot agree with someone's views, even when I know that their views lead to harmful actions, even when I know they are intentionally doing wrong because of greed, hatred, and delusion, my own intention is to refrain from making them other. Thich Nhat Hanh, we have to learn to see ourselves in things that we thought were outside of ourselves in order to dissolve false boundaries. Yes, I can resist, and I will work to stop what they are doing. I can try every wise means I can think of to prevent them from harming. But as I do, I will not adopt their deluded view of the other, the enemy, because as soon as there is us here and them there, and we ignore the truth of our interbeing, our common emptiness, then they become the other, the enemy. And out of that othering arises all the violence, theft, persecution that people do to each other, to outgroups, to those with less power, and to the earth. And so in this way, I change my relationship to home, to the unknown, to the intruder at the door, or the shadows at the bottom of the stairs. My home becomes bigger because I have resolved to not allow myself to separate. It isn't easy, but if I don't challenge myself to hold what is difficult, how can I engage? Because the difficult is here, dukkha, the existential anxiety and pain of being embodied. How can I befriend reality if I don't acknowledge all of it? How can I pretend that those dark places are not also in me and that there is no light in them? So I want to share a poem by Rumi, originally written in Persian. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. So that's very transcendent. It's also very grounded. Sometimes we need a touch of poetry to move the heart. In the formal compassion practices that we do, we often use phrases like, just like me, you want to be free. Just like me, you want to be healthy. Just like me, you want to be at ease. Just like me. Sometimes we have an experiential knowing of our interconnectedness. Sometimes it might come in a flash in deep meditation or on retreat. But we don't have to have that kind of experience to feel into this truth. I can contemplate, investigate the proposition that you, like me, are not solid, fixed, or limited. That we are all experiencing dukkha, loss, pain, fear. I can look at this for myself, contemplate for myself, observe for myself. And if I see that, how can I respond to you from any other place than caring? Just like me, you, they, us. We all want to be at ease, free from suffering, safe, cared for. If we are not so different, how do I cast you out of my heart? How do I other you? So one of my resolutions going into this year is to not allow my attention to be stolen from me, to be appropriated, hijacked, to steward my own attention. Our hearts and minds are our own. Our attention is ours as well. And our attention may be the most precious resource. How and where do I direct it? To what and to whom? to those who are the loudest and richest and most demanding, or to the voices of wisdom, the voices of those who are not being heard. To pay attention, to know my experience and the experience of others are not separate. To remember our true nature, awareness, love, possibility of freedom, and to act in ways that don't increase suffering, to join my practice and my life. And so I'm resolved to open and pay attention to the places of despair and anger and fear, to keep my heart alive and sensitive, to respond from integrity and courage, and to be awake to that very human tendency to create categories, to make separations and enemies, and to try and remember, reflect, remind myself that who we are is beyond greed, beyond aversion, beyond delusion. And doing that direct looking. So Mark Nepo writes in his Book of Awakening, fear gets its power from our not looking at either the fear or what we're afraid of. Remember that attic or closet door behind which something terrifying waited, and the longer we didn't look, the harder it was to open that door? As a boy, this obsessed me until I would avoid that part of the house. But finally, when no one was home, I felt compelled to face the unknown. I stood before that attic door for the longest time, my heart pounding. It took all my small inner boy strength to open it. I waited at the threshold, and nothing happened. I inched my way in and stood in the dark even longer, until my breathing slowed, and to my surprise, my eyes grew accustomed to the dark. Pretty soon I was able to explore the old musty boxes and found pictures of my grandfather, my father's father, the only one in the family that I am like. Seeing those pictures opened me to aspects of my spirit. It seems whatever the door, whatever our fear, be it love or truth or even the prospect of death, we all have this choice again and again, avoiding that part of our house or opening the door and finding out more about ourselves by waiting until what is dark becomes seeable. So as we inhabit times that are uncertain and heavy for us, it's natural for fear to arise. And this is precisely where our practice meets us, right in the heart of that fear. So we've been talking about it today, our capacity to choose how we see and relate to others. And that capacity remains as true and as powerful as ever. And through the lenses of dukkha and emptiness, we can choose to see others not as separate, disconnected entities, but as beings just like us, navigating their own joys and struggles with varying degrees of wisdom and skill. And this doesn't mean that we agree with delusion when we find it, or that we don't resist the forms of harm when we encounter them. But we can meet the world and each other with wisdom that knows what is solid and what is empty, and compassion that holds all suffering beings. And that is a radical act of courage. This is something powerful and profoundly human, the capacity to choose. It's very normal to move around the world surrounded by the other, shadows behind a door, separate and unknown. But we can choose to see differently. We can choose to see others like ourselves, as beings made of the same fragile stuff, living with dukkha and the poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, walking through their own human experience. No, we're not having the same experience. Our lives are unique, our joys and sorrows our own. And there is a capacity to understand if we choose it. We know each other on some level as human beings. We know deeply what it is to feel at ease. We know the sharp edge of anger. We know how stubborn the grip of deluded, mistaken beliefs can be. I know that for myself. And we also know the lightness of joy, the quiet warmth of connection. These are shared threads woven through each of us. And when we allow ourselves or shift our focus so that we can see these threads as common, shared, something changes, something shifts, separation softens. We no longer need to or can we cut ourselves or others off from the humanness that we all carry together. And in this openness, beautiful qualities can emerge. Understanding, kindness, the possibility of living in a way that is a force for healing rather than division. So this is our practice, to keep choosing, not perfectly, not always, but again and again and again, as our practice, as our gift, to see with the eyes of compassion and the wisdom of emptiness, to live from the heart of connection. Thank you for your kind attention today. And if you were part of the talk today, apologies for the interruptions that happened. And I'm glad we could be together again. Be well, and I hope to practice with you very soon.